Hello, Big Brains listeners. With so many contentious issues in our deeply polarized world, the real or virtual Thanksgiving dinner table may be a hard place to find a lot of empathy this year. As we take a week off to reconnect with our families, we wanted to reshare this enlightening episode all about how empathy works and how we can make our empathy even stronger.
Individuals not getting along is as epidemic and as serious as and important as is coronavirus or tuberculosis 50 years ago.
That's Professor Peggy Mason, whose work at the University of Chicago centers around the idea of empathy in biology.
I simply think that this type of work, where we understand how individuals interact and how they will help each other and what makes them not help each other, is critical to the world actually getting along.
Right.
So I think that we need to understand the biology of groups.
It all started back in 2008 when a graduate student came to Mason with a very specific question.
Basically trying to see whether there was a biological basis for empathy. And the way she wanted to look at that was to see whether empathy was present in a rat.
That's right, a rat. She wanted to find out if rats have empathy.
Because rats don't have culture, they don't have Sunday school, they don't have parents telling them to be good or to feel empathy. If they do it because that's their biology. And that was the simple question.
And just to be clear, Peggy Mason loves rats. Maybe more than people.
Humans talk back. And rodents much less so.
Not so much, okay.
Yeah. I mean, rodents they're terrific.
Yep.
I mean, rats in particular are terrific.
Mason's research may focus on rats, but her results have real consequences for humans. We've always approached empathy, the thing that makes you feel for other people, from a sociological or a psychological point of view. But Mason says we actually need biology to understand this crucial element of our lives.
As we try to fix society's ills and we try to make people care more about each other, that one of the disciplines that should be at the table, along with sociology and policy and politics and in even psychology, should be biology.
Okay. From the University of Chicago, this is Big Brains, a podcast about pioneering research and pivotal breakthroughs that are reshaping our world. Today, Peggy Mason and where empathy comes from. I'm your host, Paul Rand. Let me start at a foundational question. What is empathy in the definition that you're working with?
So empathy is, the way we define it is, it's the communication of affect or emotion between individuals.
Okay.
So the simplest version of that is something that we call emotional contagion. And this is the communication of some affect such as distress or fear or laughter, humor. We use it all the time to say, oh, I feel empathy for another in distress. Mm-hmm. But you can also feel empathy when Anderson Cooper starts to giggle.
All right, sorry.
And you start laughing too.
Right.
That's also empathy.
Sorry, this has actually never happened to me. You always see this sort of thing on YouTube, and you don't think it actually happened to you.
That's probably why I guess to host New Year's Eve all the time, isn't it? Because he's always giggling.
Yeah, he giggles.
He giggles.
And he giggles in a very catchy kind of way.
Yeah. All right. So tell me about when you first had this idea of exploring empathy and you started doing rats. What kind of experimentation were you doing and what were you looking for?
So what we were interested to see is, would rats use empathy as a motivation for an action? And the action that we wanted to look for was helping.
Okay.
So if they saw an individual in distress, would they help that individual if they could?
This may sound like a simple thing, but the answer could really tell us a lot about where empathy comes from. If a rat helps another rat, it has to be because of their biology. Rats don't have language or ethics or culture to drive them. They just have instincts.
So we have this arena that's about 1.5 foot square, and in the center of it is a see-through acrylic tube. There's a rat that's inside that tube. That tube has one door. The rat on the inside can't open it. So you put another rat in there and say, well, we can't tell the rat, go help him. We can't do anything. He has to teach himself. He has to learn by teaching himself.
Okay.
So if he cares enough, he goes into the center of the arena, which is really not a favorite thing for rodents to do. They like to stick by the sides. And so they go into the center because they're very perturbed by this trapped rat.
Okay.
They nudge the door open, and out comes the trapped rat.
So the rat opens the door, even though that means putting itself in a vulnerable position. It makes a deliberate, concerted effort to save its fellow rodent, even if they're a stranger.
The question is, will they do it again the next day? And in fact, what happens the next day, they do it again, and they do it much faster. So by the end of 12 days of testing, they're doing it boom, boom, boom.
Okay.
Within a minute or two, they open.
Now, are they doing this because they want to play with the other rat?
So that was our first thought, and to test that, I mean, that would be fine, but we needed to test it. What we did was we put two arenas together. The divide between the tube was put up against that divide. So when the trapped rat got out, he got out to a separate arena, and they couldn't play together. And what we found was that the rat would open for the trapped rat, even if it went to a different arena, and it would not open if the tube was empty.
So these rats really do appear to be fundamentally driven to help each other. They show empathy, despite having no personal reward.
Essentially, as mammals, we are motivated to alleviate the distress of others. We are motivated by the distress of others to do something that is other-oriented.
Okay.
You're not doing it for yourself in the sense that you're getting out or that you're playing with the other guy. You're doing it for the other, and that it does give the helper something. It gives the helper what we call the warm glow of helping.
Okay.
So there's an internal reward, otherwise they wouldn't do it. But that's what they're getting out of it, nothing external.
So Mason has her original question answered. There is a biological basis for empathy, but ever the scientist, she thinks of another question. Will the rats help a stranger? A rat they've never met?
And the answer is yeah, they help a stranger.
So then, why?
Well, what we realized was that because they're lab rats and they've gone through this genetic bottleneck back in the early 20th century, they probably seem familiar by smell, by sight, by sound, by feel. And so we took a different type of rat, in this case a black-caped rat, and we introduced the black-caped rats.
So here's the question. Since white lab rats would have felt familiar to each other, Mason wanted to know if a white rat would save a black rat if it had never seen a black rat before. The answer was no.
And so what we found was that if a white albino rat had lived with a black-caped rat, just one, he'd help any black-caped rat. But if he had never seen a black-caped rat before, he would never help a black-caped rat. So that was really quite amazing, but it suggests that there's this incredible effect of environment. And it really begs the question of whether there's any role for genetics. And that's how we got to what we call the Mowgli experiment.
Okay. Mowgli as in
Jungle Book Mowgli. In the Jungle Book, right.
So this is the man cub. I've never seen one up so close before.
And so what we did was we took these albino pups on the day they were born, and we put them into a litter with black-caped rats and a black-caped rat mother. And we grew them up, and when they were weaned, they lived with a black-caped rat littermate. So when they were adults, they had never seen another albino rat. And then the question was, who would they help? Well, of course they helped the black-caped rats because they'd lived with them all their lives. The real question was, would they help an albino rat? And the answer was no.
Okay.
So
even though they were an albino rat.
They themselves are an albino rat, but they've never seen another albino rat. And they don't get who they are from DNA any more than you and I do.
This discovery builds even further from her original result. Empathy may come from biology, but it can be shaped by social and environmental influences. But what does all of this tell us about us, humans, you and me? For Mason, her mind went immediately to race.
Of course. I think it's quite natural to think about types of rats, types of individuals, and think of race, which is one of the great social dividing factors in the U.S. And I think that the lessons that we've learned from the rats are just so wonderful, because what they tell us is that we can control this simply by diversifying our environment, that by interacting with others from a different type, then you become affiliative towards any of that type.
Basically, this was more scientific proof that race and racism are not rooted in biology. We can control the environments we create, make systems and societies that work for or against empathy between different groups. To Mason, this is actually optimistic.
That's a really wonderful message, and we can get a lot farther if we simply understand that diversity in exposure, in interaction, is critically important. Now, one of the things that we're interested in doing more long-term is to try and figure out, how do the rats categorize? What does it take to motivate them to accept another type? And what sensory inputs are critical for that? Obviously, with an aim to try and take some lessons from the rats to use them to increase humans' acceptance of different types than they have been exposed to. And there's something called a minimal groupism, minimal groups. And so essentially, if you give a bunch of people red bands and blue bands, and you say, you're on the red team and they're on the blue team and you're the red team and red, you can make those red teams very diverse, and they will be first for each other.
Got it.
No matter what other diversity is. So you can change the axes upon which people will affiliate. It's plastic as hell.
This discovery has powerful implications for the human world, but Mason's work is not over yet. There's more after the break. If you enjoy the conversations we have here on Big Brains, then there's another podcast that may be perfect for you. It's called Opinion Has It. Produced by Project Syndicate, Opinion Has It goes beyond the headlines to unpack some of the world's most pressing issues. Tune in every other week to hear from leading economists, policymakers, activists, authors, and more. Make your podcast feed smarter with Opinion Has It from Project Syndicate. Mason's rats have given us incredible insights into when, why, and how we may feel empathy for one another. But they may also have something to tell us about a long-held social science theory you may have heard of. It's called the bystander effect, and it's a theory that was sparked by the story of one woman.
Catherine Genovese, often called Kitty Genovese. Okay. And she was raped and murdered in Kew Gardens on a hot summer night.
In a front-page story, the New York Times reported that 37 witnesses either saw or heard the attack. The headline said they saw it, and not one lifted a finger.
Her story is taught in psychology classes, and her name is synonymous with people who look the other way when trouble happens.
That story is now known to be non-factual on many levels.
The Times also corrected its reporting to say that, quote, the portrayal of 38 witnesses as fully aware and unresponsive was erroneous.
Nonetheless, that story motivated Bibliotani and John Darley to investigate why an individual would be less likely to help when they're in a group than when they're alone. And that is a very consistent finding if a person is tested with what are called confederates.
Confederates are people in research experiments who seem to be regular participants, but are actually part of the experiment. So in this case, what they'll do is
deliberately not help. And being with a confederate changes their behavior from what they would do when they're alone. So for example, a person is called into a room, they have to fill out a questionnaire. This is a distractor task. As they're sitting there, smoke comes in from one of the vents. If they're being tested alone, they leave the room and tell somebody this at around a 75% rate.
Okay.
If they are in there with one or two confederates, that
don't help.
That rate goes down to 13%. That's the effect of having two individuals who are not helping. You would think that, in fact,
yes.
Why should it change? But it does change. And more recently, some people have looked at this using the cameras that are everywhere in modern life to see whether individuals on the street help in violent encounters. The answer is yes. The further answer is that for every extra individual that is present, the amount of helping goes up by a factor of 1.1. In other words, having a Confederate there suppresses helping. Having a non-Confederate, a naive person, if you will, it does not decrease it. Suffice it to say that we've managed to recapitulate this entire effect with rats, which tells you that this is, again, this is a biological thing. So the common explanation for the bystander effect is there's a lot of hand-wringing about the dissolution of society. We don't care about each other. And something called diffusion of responsibility. And our data are pretty clear. If the rats show it, then it's very unlikely to be diffusion of responsibility.
Yep. If you were given an unlimited amount of resources, and the question was, I want to figure out the challenges that we feel our world's stressed by. And I want to look at this behavior to try to find some answers that could actually benefit humans and society on a larger scale. Where would you put your experiments and what would you be trying to figure out?
I want to know what it is about being exposed to another type of individual that makes somebody accept all those individuals. So what I know today is that if I house an albino rat with a black Cape rat for 2 weeks,
okay,
then they'll help any black Cape rat. What is that based on? And how can I make it happen faster? How we can make it happen faster was the experiment we did this past summer. Not published, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that's a very...
You feel like you found an answer?
Oh, yeah.
You did?
Food is involved.
Okay.
Food is involved. I don't know if you've
like
seen...
we had Big Macs for everybody. It would all be fine.
Have you seen the play Oslo?
Yes.
It's very Oslo.
Okay.
When did things actually work? When they were at the table, having those delicious, what were they? Dumplings, muffins, something or other that the cook made.
Yep.
Right now I'm in conversation with a couple of Israeli scientists to try and replicate this in humans, to try and test what we've done in the rats in humans.
Okay.
So yeah,
Boy,
anybody wants to fund that?
Okay.
Get in touch with me.
Okay. How often, when you get asked, are people trying to figure out how to take your work and your insights and apply them to some of the problem solving, to policy and other things?
I wish they were.
Okay, not so much.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. What would help them? Because it feels like it, and maybe this next round of experiments that you're getting at, maybe we're going to find there's communal tables set up around the world.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
What would it take for people to realize that, because there's so much work going into policy, what do you hope, if you had to sit down and say, listen, I wish you guys would pay attention to this, because it would really make a difference as you're setting different kind of policies?
Yeah, I think that we need to think about the geographic isolation that we have made of people of different identities.
Okay.
And that is really it's gonna bias the results so far, for the entire life. And so somehow we've got to get more mixing in.
We'll have to wait to see exactly what Mason finds with her next round of experiments, but in terms of the question of empathy in biology, it seems like Mason's finally got her answer.
What I'm left with is, here we are, we've diverged from rodents 65, 70 million years ago, and they're helping other individuals in distress. And we do too, but sometimes we don't. And I think that the bottom line is that when we are helping another in distress, we are acting out our biological inheritance. And when we don't, we're actually actively suppressing it. And it makes me think of the saying that you say at Passover Seder every year, which is, and Pharaoh hardened his heart. You have to actively not let yourself help. And I think that many of us who live in cities, at least, have this experience when we pass somebody who's asking for money.
You want to help.
You have to kind of gird yourself not to help. We are mammals. We want to help. And of course we can't help everybody, or else we'd never get home and we'd have no money.
Right.
But it takes an effort not to help. And so I think that these experiments really tell us that as we try to fix society's ills and we try to make people care more about each other, that one of the disciplines that should be at the table, along with sociology and policy and politics and in even psychology, should be biology.
Okay.
Big Brains is a production of the UChicago Podcast Network. If you like what you heard, please give us a review and a rating. The show is hosted by Paul M. Rand and produced by me, Matt Hodap, with assistance from Alyssa Eads. Thanks for listening.